I need you to picture this with me. It is November, a Sunday morning, and the kitchen smells like coffee I made but haven't touched. The table has papers spread across it, financial documents, notarized forms, letters from attorneys, all of it arranged with the kind of careful precision that only comes from months of planning in secret. The framed picture of Jesus is in the hallway behind me, and I can feel that gaze on the back of my neck the way I always have. Raymond is standing on the other side of that table, and his face has gone the color of old paste. His mouth is moving, but no words are coming out yet, because he has just realized something he never thought was possible. He has just realized that I know everything. And then he says my name. Dorothy. He starts. Like a man reaching for a handhold on a wall that is turned to air. I know what I signed, I say. And I know what you did with it. He looks at me like he is seeing me for the first time in 20 years. Maybe he is. But I need to back up. I need to tell you how we got to that kitchen table, because that moment did not arrive on its own. It was built, brick by slow brick, out of 25 years of a particular kind of faith I held in a man who understood my faith better than I ever understood it myself. It was built out of every morning I came downstairs in my royal purple robe and told myself that what I had was enough, that love did not need to be visible to be real, that reciprocity would come in its own time. It was built, most of all, out of one September evening at a restaurant with white linen tablecloths, when a woman in a red dress walked up to our anniversary table and asked my husband a question so simple it should have had no weight at all. Is she your wife? 2 seconds. He hesitated for 2 seconds. And in those 2 seconds, Dorothy Holloway, age 73, finally began to see. Let me start at the beginning. I grew up on the rural outskirts of what most people think of when they picture the edges of Chicago. Not the gleaming skyline, not the Lakeshore Drive money, but the South Side world where the sky goes wide and flat in every direction, and mobile homes sit next to modest houses, and the horizon never pretends to be anything it isn't. That kind of landscape either gives you patience or it gives you loneliness. I have always believed it gave me both. I carried both into my marriage. My small cottage with peeling paint and a vegetable garden has been my home for most of my adult life. In the spring, which is my favorite season, when the windows finally open and the air has that particular freshness that only comes after a long Chicago winter has finally exhausted itself, the garden begins its slow resurrection. Tomatoes, collard greens, a row of marigolds along the fence that I planted years ago because I read somewhere they keep pests away. Every morning, I come downstairs in my royal purple robe, the one with the velvet trim that has gotten soft from so many washings, and I pour a glass of sweet tea from the plastic pitcher I keep in the cold back corner of the refrigerator, and I sit at the kitchen table and open my crossword puzzle book. This morning, I am in the waiting room at my doctor's office. The plastic chair bites into my lower back. The fluorescent light buzzes above the rows of people holding their appointment cards and staring at their phones. I have no phone to stare at. I have nothing to do but sit here with my memories, and so I am letting them come. The rotary phone on the wall in my cottage still works. I have not given the new number to Raymond. I look at that phone some mornings and feel something that is not quite grief and not quite relief, like standing at the edge of a property line in early spring, knowing what grew there before, and not yet knowing what will grow there next. The framed picture of Jesus in the hallway watched me walk past it every single morning of those 25 years, and I have come to believe he knew what was happening in that house long before I was willing to see it. Something I have learned about betrayal. It does not arrive all at once. It plants itself quietly, in the soil of your trust, and grows so slowly that by the time you can see it clearly, it has roots deep enough to shake the entire foundation. I should have paid more attention to certain silences. I should have read more carefully. I should have asked more questions. But I was 73 years old, and I had given Raymond Dwight Holloway 25 years of my life, and I believed in something I called reciprocity. The idea that a sacrifice kept and honored and renewed would eventually be honored in return. I believed in it the way I believed in that picture of Jesus in the hallway. completely, without auditing, without requiring proof. That belief was the most expensive thing I ever owned. The waiting room nurse calls the name before mine, and a man in a heavy coat stands up slowly. The way we all stand up now, with some negotiation between will and body. I watch him shuffle toward the inner door and think, every one of us in this room has a story we are sitting with. Every single one. Mine started with a hesitation that lasted 2 seconds and changed everything. If you have never been gaslit, I want you to understand something before I try to explain it. It does not feel like being manipulated. It does not feel like anything dramatic at all. It feels like being slowly, gently convinced that your own perception is the least reliable thing in the room. It feels like trying to read your crossword puzzle in a room where someone keeps dimming the lights 1 degree at a time. So gradually that you keep adjusting, keep squinting, keep telling yourself you can still see just fine. Raymond was masterful at this. He had been masterful at it for years, but I did not have the word for what he was doing. I had other words. I called it his way. I called it the stress of his work. I called it the difficulty of our particular season. I called it everything except what it was, because giving it the right name would have required me to revise an entire story I had been writing about my own life since I was in my 40s and believed I had finally found the man who would stay. I want to tell you about the sacrifice first, because I think it matters more than most people realize. I did not sacrifice dramatic things. I did not sacrifice organs or savings accounts or obvious dignities, not at first. I sacrificed time, years of dedication without the smallest recognition that time is the only currency that cannot be returned. I gave up the ceramic studio I wanted to open in 2009. I had found a space on a side street not far from our neighborhood, a bright little storefront with good light, and I had been saving toward it quietly. And when I mentioned it to Raymond that spring, he made a face that I had learned meant this is not the moment, and we did not speak of it again. By 2010, the storefront had become a hair salon. I gave up my trip to see my sister in Memphis for 3 years running. Every year something came up. Raymond's health, Raymond's schedule, the car needing work, the finances being tight, always something reasonable. Always something I could not argue with without sounding selfish. My sister Evelyn called me every Sunday, and I would tell her I was coming soon, I was working on it, maybe next spring. By the 3rd year she stopped asking directly, and I think we both understood something neither of us wanted to say out loud. I gave up doing crossword puzzles at the kitchen table with any real pleasure. This might sound small, but I need you to understand what those puzzles meant to me. Sitting with my sweet tea in the early morning, working through the clues with my pencil, feeling the satisfaction of each word slotting into its proper place. That was the hour of every day that belonged entirely to me. Raymond began sleeping later as the years went on and would come downstairs irritated, finding fault with small things. The light, the smell of my tea, the scratching of my pencil. And slowly, the way everything slow happens, I began doing my puzzles faster, more quietly, finishing before he came down so there was nothing for him to object to. I gave the hour away 1 comment at a time and told myself I was being considerate. I want you to hear me on this. Are you the kind of person who gives and tells yourself it's love? I am speaking directly to you. That particular kind of generosity can be weaponized against you by someone who understands that you will reframe your own diminishment as devotion. My faith kept me steady through all of it, or what I thought was steadiness. Every morning I passed the framed picture of Jesus in the hallway, and I prayed the kind of prayer that is more like a conversation than a petition. I prayed for patience. I prayed for understanding. I prayed for Raymond to soften. The women in my Sunday circle at church were women I had known for years. Women with their own silences, their own adjustments, their own negotiations. And we did not talk about the harder things on Sunday mornings. We talked about casseroles and scripture and the grandchildren. We held our private griefs in our laps like heavy purses and never set them down on the table between us. Looking back now, I can see the seeds of the betrayal scattered through years of ordinary Tuesday evenings. The phone call he took outside, the account statement I asked about, and he redirected my question so smoothly I forgot I had asked it. The Thursday in March of 2018 when he said, "Come with me to the attorney's office. It's routine estate planning. This protects both of us, baby." His attorney's office with the walnut desk and the diplomas in their frames and the pen placed precisely on the paper where he needed my signature. "What am I signing?" I asked. "Standard power of attorney," Raymond said, "so we can each act for the other if something happens." I believed him. I believed him because 20 years of believing him had become its own kind of gravity. I believed him because I was sitting in a walnut-paneled room with a serious man in a suit who was using serious legal language. And I did not want to be the woman who didn't understand serious legal language. I believed him because reciprocity told me he would protect what I had protected, that 20 years of sacrifice meant I was owed safety. I signed. I did not know what I had signed. Not fully. Not in the way that matters. That night, Raymond made us dinner. Food from a recipe his mother used to make, something warm and substantial. And he was affectionate in the way he sometimes was after a thing he needed from me had been accomplished. I sat across from him at the table where I did my crossword puzzles and thought, this is what 20 years of staying looks like. This is the dividend. I told myself that, and I believed it. But something felt wrong. Not dramatically wrong. Just slightly, persistently wrong. The way a word in a crossword puzzle sometimes fits all the crossing letters and still doesn't sit right. And you stare at it knowing something is off but unable to see what. There is a particular kind of morning that comes about 3 weeks after you have started to seriously suspect that something in your life is deeply, structurally wrong. It is a quiet morning. The garden is beginning its spring work outside, the marigolds just starting to push up through the soil, and you are sitting at your kitchen table with your sweet tea and your crossword puzzle book. And you are not doing the puzzle. You are staring at the rotary phone on the wall and running figures in your head for the 4th time, and getting the same answer for the 4th time. And that answer does not match what Raymond told you last month. And you know, not suspect, know, that you are looking at a discrepancy he intended for you never to find. I stopped crying sometime in early October of 2022. I want you to understand that transition, because it is important. I had cried for most of September, after the anniversary dinner with the white linen tablecloths and the $80 wine and the woman in the red dress. I had cried in the bathroom with the door closed. I had cried in the garden with my hands in the soil. I had cried late at night in the dark while Raymond slept and snored with the untroubled rhythm of a man who did not know his wife had finally begun to pay attention. I want to be clear. The woman in the red dress did not cause my collapse. She was the instrument of it, but the collapse itself came from something she gave me involuntarily, a mirror. She looked at me with that particular kind of pity that only comes from knowledge, and I suddenly saw what she saw. An old woman in her anniversary dress who had no idea. A woman who had been signing away pieces of her own life and calling it love. I saw myself through her eyes for approximately 4 seconds. And those 4 seconds undid me more completely than anything Raymond had ever said or done directly. The key object had been hanging on the wall of my kitchen for all 25 years of our marriage. That rotary phone, the same one that was there when I moved in, still mounted, still connected, still capable of receiving calls from anyone who knew the number. Raymond always said it was ridiculous to keep it, that it was old-fashioned, that nobody called that number. But I kept it because it had been there when I first stood in that kitchen and thought, this is mine. And there was something in me that needed it to stay. Something I could not have named then. I could name it now. It was the last thing in that house that was purely, unambiguously mine. Raymond had opinions about the furniture. He had preferences about the curtains. He had filed paperwork about the property itself that I had not yet begun to understand. But the phone on the wall, that old rotary handset that still clicked satisfyingly through its dial, had simply never come up. He had never touched it. It hung there, witness to everything, never belonging to anyone's agenda. When I began my investigation, I started with what I could access. I went through the filing cabinet in Raymond's office on a Wednesday afternoon when he was out. I was methodical. I was slow. I photographed account statements with a camera borrowed from the woman next door. I told her I needed it for the garden, to document what was blooming. I copied down account numbers in my crossword puzzle book in the same neat pencil I used for the clues. I contacted the county clerk's office and asked about property filings, something I should have done years earlier but had not because I had believed in reciprocity instead. What I found was the full shape of the betrayal. The power of attorney I had signed in March of 2018 was not what Raymond had described. It gave him extraordinarily broad control over assets, including my portion of the marital property, including the cottage, including financial accounts I believed were jointly held. Raymond had used the 4 years since that Thursday afternoon in the walnut-paneled office to quietly restructure the economic reality of our marriage. Money I believed we shared had been moved. A trust he controlled entirely had been established. My name appeared on liabilities and his name appeared on assets. And the mechanism by which this had been accomplished was a document I had signed without reading, because I was the kind of woman who believed that 25 years of sacrifice was its own protection. The wealth of what we had built together, the small fortune in equity, the income from his rental properties that I had helped him manage for a decade, the net worth we had accumulated through my caregiving work when his mother was ill and I had kept our household running while he preserved his business dealings, all of it had been repositioned. Not stolen in any way that looked like theft. Repositioned, legally, through documents I had authorized. I sat at my kitchen table with my cold sweet tea and my photographs and my penciled account numbers, and I felt the bottom of my collapse fully for the first time. Not the surface-level collapse of the anniversary dinner, not the collapse of discovering the woman in the red dress. The deep collapse. The one that comes when you understand that the betrayal was not an impulse or an affair or a moment of weakness. It was a plan, executed over years, by a man who had understood your belief in reciprocity and used it as a mechanism, who had studied the architecture of your faith in him and built something inside it that you were never supposed to see. The rotary phone on the wall seemed to mock me from its place on the kitchen wall. I stared at it. I had kept it because it was mine. And yet he had managed to place himself between me and everything else I thought was mine, one careful document at a time. I picked up the handset. The dial tone was steady. I held it for a long time before I put it back. I was not crying anymore. I was thinking. I need to tell you about Carla Jean Morrow, because without her, I am not sure what my story would look like. I am not sure I would be sitting in this waiting room thinking about spring and new locks and the wide sky over my sister's house. I might still be sitting at my kitchen table pretending to do crossword puzzles, while the slow machinery of Raymond's plans continued to operate in the spaces I was not looking at. Carla Jean had been Raymond's attorney for 11 years. Not my attorney, his. A distinction I want you to hold carefully. She was the person on his side. She knew the walnut desk and the serious legal language and the precise placement of pens on documents. She had drawn up other paperwork for him over the years, things I had signed or hadn't signed, things I knew about or didn't. She and Raymond had parted badly in 2021. I did not know the full story of their falling out, and I have decided I do not need it. What I need is what she gave me. She called on the rotary phone on the wall that still works, on a Tuesday morning in the second week of October. I almost did not answer. I did not recognize the number at first. It came up as a downtown Chicago exchange. And in those weeks after the anniversary dinner, I had been reluctant to answer calls I wasn't expecting. But something made me pick up the handset and say hello. And a woman's voice said, "Is this Dorothy Holloway?" And when I said yes, she said, "My name is Carla Jean Morrow. I used to work for your husband. I think we need to talk. I want to describe what happened in my body in that moment. Not the drama of it. There was no drama, just me standing in my kitchen in my royal purple robe, holding the old handset to my ear, the morning light coming in through the window over the sink. What happened in my body was a kind of stillness. Not the numb stillness of shock. The precise stillness of a woman who has been living in a house where a fire has been smoldering in the walls, who has been smelling smoke for months and telling herself it was probably nothing, and who has just, finally, Heard someone else say I smell it too. Carla Jean told me what I had signed in 2018. She told me in the flat, careful language of an attorney speaking to someone who needs clarity more than comfort. She told me about the scope of the power of attorney, about the trust structure Raymond had built, about the financial moves that had been made inside the 4 years since that document was executed. She told me I had 30 days to act before the next filing would make the asset restructuring significantly harder to challenge. She did not tell me she was doing this out of friendship or goodwill. She did not offer an emotional speech about justice. She said, "I know what Raymond did, and I know what he used me to do, and I am not willing to be part of it anymore. I have an obligation that I should have acted on earlier, and I am acting on it now. Do you hear what I am telling you? The ally who saves you will not always look the way you expect. She will not always be your friend first. She will not always come wrapped in warmth. Sometimes the most important voice in your life arrives in the form of a woman who was on the wrong side for years and finally couldn't live with it. Don't disqualify her because of where she came from. Listen to what she knows." I sat down at my kitchen table after that call, and I stayed there for a long time. My sweet tea warmed to room temperature, and then past it. My crossword puzzle book was open to a half-finished puzzle from the day before. The framed picture of Jesus was in the hallway where it always was. Everything was in its place. Everything, I now understood, needed to move. I want to describe what it feels like when grief becomes determination, because it is a physical transition, and I think most people try to describe it as a mental one and get it wrong. Grief lives in the chest and the throat. It is heavy, and it makes you move slowly, like walking through chest-high water. Determination lives lower, in the belly and the legs. It has no weight. It is not heavy. It is dense. When grief becomes determination, it feels like the water draining, like the floor coming back up under your feet, like gravity remembering which direction it goes. My grief had been sitting in my chest for 25 years. That morning, for the first time, I felt the floor. I was not naive about what I was facing. Raymond was not a small man in any sense. He had money, connections, an attorney who had been working for him for a decade even before Carla Jean. He had a particular way of moving through his world that I had watched for 25 years, and that I understood better than he knew. He was meticulous when it mattered, and sloppy when he thought no one was watching. He underestimated the women who served him. He had underestimated me for so long that he had completely forgotten I was watching. That was going to matter. I wrote down Carla Jean's direct number on the inside cover of my crossword puzzle book, below the pencil record of account numbers I had been building. Then I closed the book and put it in the drawer of the kitchen table where I kept rubber bands and old pens, and I went upstairs and changed out of my royal purple robe and got dressed to meet a new attorney. The machinery of Raymond's plan had 30 days to run. I intended to be in motion before he had any idea. There is a particular kind of discipline required to sit across a dinner table from a man who has been quietly dismantling the legal structure of your life for 4 years, to pass him the salt, to ask about his day, to refill your glass of sweet tea, and not allow a single thing in your face or your hands or the quality of your silence to tell him that you know. I am 73 years old. I have spent a lifetime learning to manage my face. I was better at this than Raymond ever gave me credit for, because Raymond, like many people who underestimate others, believed that the person he had always seen was the complete person. He had seen Dorothy who defers, Dorothy who adjusts, Dorothy who sacrifices, for so long that he no longer looked for anything else. This was, as it turned out, his critical error. I opened that October and all of November as a woman playing a familiar role on a stage she knows is about to be demolished. I came downstairs every morning in my royal purple robe. I made sweet tea and poured it into the plastic pitcher in the refrigerator and did my crossword puzzles at the kitchen table. I asked Raymond questions about his plans and listened to his answers with the calm, half-attentive expression of a woman who has heard similar answers for 25 years. I passed the framed picture of Jesus in the hallway every morning and evening. I tended my vegetable garden, which in this late autumn had mostly gone to dry stalks, though a few late marigolds were still holding on along the fence with that particular stubbornness that I had always admired in them. Meanwhile, in the drawer of my kitchen table, my crossword puzzle book was filling up with information that had nothing to do with crosswords. My new attorney was a woman named Patricia Elaine Dupre, who had an office on the third floor of a building on the south side, and who wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and had the manner of someone who has been managing crises long enough to find them interesting rather than alarming. I liked her immediately. I told her everything: the 2018 document, the account moves, Carla Jean's call, the 30-day window. She listened without interrupting, and then took off her reading glasses and said, "This is manageable. We have more leverage than you think." The liberation symbol happened on a Thursday morning in late November, and I want to tell you what it felt like, because I think some of you will understand this immediately, and others will need me to explain why a locksmith can be the most important person who enters your home in a decade. I had called the locksmith the previous Monday. Raymond was scheduled to be away for 2 days. He traveled periodically for business, or what he called business, and I used those 2 days to make arrangements I could not make while he was in the house. The locksmith arrived at 9 in the morning. He was 22 years old and cheerful in the uncomplicated way that young people are cheerful when they have not yet accumulated the particular griefs of middle age. He changed every lock in my cottage: front door, back door, the side entrance through the garden, all of them. When he was done, he handed me 2 sets of keys and said, with that cheerful young man's simplicity, "All yours." I held those keys in my palm for a long time. The cottage was mine. In some ways, it had always been mine. I had lived there longer, tended it longer, loved it with a more specific love. The love you have for a place where your morning rituals live. But the paperwork Raymond had accumulated told a different story about ownership, and while Patricia was working on that story through the proper channels, there was a more immediate story that those 2 new keys were telling, one that I held in my palm with something building in my chest that was close to joy but quieter, more durable. If you have ever changed the locks on your own home and stood holding the new keys and understood for the first time in years that a door being yours is an actual fact and not just a feeling, then you know exactly what I am describing. If you have not, I hope you never need to. But if you ever do, I want you to remember that the woman holding those keys can be 73 years old and still be standing at the beginning of something. Carla Jean called me 3 times during this period, and each call added material to the file Patricia was building. On the second call, Carla Jean mentioned that Raymond had contacted his own new attorney, and that there were preliminary indications he was aware something was happening, though he did not yet know what or how much. This was the close call. Not the most dramatic kind. No one burst through a door. No one discovered my crossword book. No confrontation erupted before I was ready. But Raymond came home from his 2-day trip earlier than expected, on the first evening rather than the second, and I was sitting at the kitchen table with several documents spread in front of me, photographs from the file Patricia was building, and the crossword book open beside them. I heard his key in the old lock, the key that no longer worked, as he would discover, and had approximately 40 seconds before he would come through the back door with his spare, which he kept on a ring in his coat pocket, and I used those 40 seconds to put every document back into the kitchen drawer, close the crossword book, and have a glass of sweet tea in my hand, and a half-finished puzzle open to a fresh page before he walked into the kitchen. He stood in the doorway looking at me for a moment. "When did you change the locks?" he said. "The front lock was sticking," I said. "Has been for months. I should have done it sooner." He watched my face. I looked at my crossword puzzle and wrote in a word. "What's a 6-letter word for forewarned?" I said. He went to the refrigerator and poured himself a glass of sweet tea and did not ask anything further. I wrote alerted in the puzzle and did not let him see me breathe. Patricia Elaine Dupree's office had become the most important room in my life. I went there on 3 separate afternoons during the weeks leading up to December. Walking through the late autumn Southside streets, the wide, flat sky visible above the rooftops, the smell of dried leaves and chimney smoke, the particular quality of light that comes when the trees have let go of everything and the landscape shows its actual bones. I wore my good coat and carried my crossword book, which by now was more a legal notebook than a puzzle book, and I sat across from Patricia's desk while she explained to me exactly what we were building and exactly what it would accomplish. She had filed documents on my behalf through the county clerk's office, contesting the power of attorney on grounds of insufficient disclosure. She had contacted the relevant financial institutions about a hold on certain account transfers. She had spoken with Carla Jean 3 times and had obtained, through proper channels, documentation that established both the scope of what Raymond had done and the timeline. The business of what had happened to the income, the wealth that should have been jointly held, the net worth that had been restructured through trust mechanisms and account transfers. All of it was now visible, documented, and in the process of being addressed. Raymond drove an Audi A8 in graphite gray that he had purchased in 2020. I want to tell you about that car because it matters to me even if it shouldn't. It was a beautiful vehicle. You have to give it that. Sleek and low and expensive in a way that didn't announce itself loudly, the way certain kinds of wealth are most effective when they're quiet. When I had asked about the purchase, he had said it was a business expense, that the image it conveyed was part of his professional operation. I had looked at that car parked in our driveway and thought about the ceramic studio I hadn't opened in 2009, the trips to see Evelyn that hadn't happened, the years of my labor that had contributed to the financial position that made that graphite gray car possible, and I had felt something I had told myself was unworthy. It wasn't unworthy. It was accurate. The car was purchased with a fortune built in part with my time and my silence, and I had never been offered any accounting of that. I was thinking about the car on the Sunday morning in late November when I decided the time had come. Patricia had everything she needed. Carla Jean had provided everything she could. The filing that would have made it significantly harder to contest Raymond's restructuring had been preempted by our earlier actions. I was, as Patricia had said with a satisfaction she allowed herself one occasion to express, in a much stronger position than Raymond realized. I had said nothing to Raymond through all of October and November. I want to say that again, so it lands properly. I had sat across from this man at breakfast and dinner, had passed him the remote control, had told him the garden was mostly done for the season, had lived in the same small cottage with peeling paint, and I had said nothing. Not because I was afraid, not because I had given up, because the most powerful thing I could do for myself in those weeks was to let him continue to believe that the woman he had been living with for 25 years was exactly the woman he thought she was. The trap was not complicated. It did not need to be. The best kind of trap is one that cannot be escaped because it is made of truth. What I had assembled, with Patricia's help and Carla Jean's documentation and my own months of careful attention, was simply the truth. Not an interpretation of the truth. Not a version of the truth that required arguing about who had intended what and who had misunderstood whom. The documents were what they were. The account transfers were what they were. The timeline was what it was. I called Raymond on a Saturday evening and told him I needed to talk to him in the morning. I said it plainly, with no particular inflection, the way I might have said I need to get to the grocery store tomorrow. He said, okay. He watched my face for a moment and I let him watch it, gave him nothing. That night I sat at the kitchen table with my sweet tea, the real kind I make when I need to think, steeped long so it's almost amber, and I did something I had not done in months. I opened my crossword puzzle book to a clean page, and I worked through a puzzle purely for the pleasure of it. Across and down, pencil on paper, the small satisfaction of each word fitting precisely into the space that had been designed for it. I passed the framed picture of Jesus in the hallway on my way to bed. In the morning, the papers would be on the table. Sunday morning, and the light came in flat and cold through the kitchen window. I had been awake since 4:30. I had come downstairs at 5, put on my royal purple robe, made my sweet tea, and arranged the papers on the kitchen table the way Patricia had told me to arrange them. Organized by category, each section clearly visible, the attorney's letter on top so it would be the first thing he saw. Then I sat down and I waited. I was not afraid. I want to be precise about this. I was not trembling or hollow or braced for impact. What I felt was a tremendous, uncharacteristic stillness, the way the air feels in a garden just before it rains. Dense, charged, completely quiet, as if the world were gathering itself. I had been moving toward this table for months. I had arrived. The only thing left was to let it happen. Raymond came downstairs at 7:15. He was in his robe, his reading glasses pushed up on top of his head, and he was already looking at his phone. He walked through the kitchen doorway and toward the refrigerator, and then he stopped. He had registered the table in his peripheral vision, the papers, the arrangement, the fact that I was sitting at the end nearest the window with my hands around my tea glass and my eyes on him. He looked at the papers for a long time without speaking. I let him look. Then he pulled out the chair across from me, slowly, with the careful movement of a man who has just realized that the ground under his feet may not be what it was, and he sat down. He put on his reading glasses and he looked at the letter from Patricia Elaine Dupree, and I watched his face the way I had watched the garden for years, patient and without expectation, letting what was there become visible. "Dorothy," he started. "I know what I signed," I said, "and I know what you did with it." He put the letter down. He looked at me with the expression of a man who has dropped something breakable and cannot yet determine whether it has shattered. He had lived with the assumption of my ignorance for so long that its absence was genuinely disorienting to him. He did not know this woman sitting across from him. He thought he did. He had always thought he did. "You don't understand all of this," he said. "These documents, they're complicated. There's context. You used a power of attorney I signed without full disclosure to restructure marital assets into a trust under your sole control," I said. "Over a 4-year period, starting in March of 2018. I paused. "Is there context that changes those facts?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Where did you get—" and stopped himself. "Carla Jean Morrow," I said. "She called me on the phone." I glanced at the rotary phone on the wall. He followed my glance and I saw something shift in him. "She's been very helpful." Raymond had never been a man who raised his voice. That was not his method. His method was deflection, reframing, the patient erosion of your certainty. He tried that now. He tried to explain that the trust structure was for both of them, that it was protection, that I had never been interested in the financial details. "You always trusted me with this, Dorothy. That was your choice." And I let him run through it. I let him use every argument I might have believed 6 months ago, every rhetorical device that had worked on me for 25 years. And then I said, "Patricia Elaine Dupree, that's my attorney's name. She's filed with the county clerk on the power of attorney, and she's already in contact with the financial institutions. The case number is on the top page." I pushed the letter toward him slightly. "You'll want to make sure your attorney has that." The silence that followed was the most complete silence I had experienced in 25 years of marriage. Not the loaded silence of a fight being swallowed, not the resentful silence of an argument suspended. A genuine silence, in which the last of his certainty about who he was dealing with finished draining out of him. "You never said anything," he said finally. His voice was different now, quieter and more real. "No," I said. "I didn't. All these weeks, yes." He looked at the papers and then at me, and I held his gaze without effort, without anger,
without the terrible trembling that had kept me company through September and October. I was past trembling. I had gotten there not through hardening, I want to be clear about this, but through something more fundamental. I had finally understood what I was owed, which is not the same as demanding it angrily. It is calmer than anger. It is the knowledge of your own worth, stated plainly, requiring nothing from anyone else in order to be true. You gave me 25 years, I thought. You took 25 years, and I let you, because I believed a lie about how love keeps accounts. But I know something now that I didn't know when I sat in that attorney's office with the walnut desk. I know that no signature I gave under false pretenses was ever truly mine to give. And I know that a woman who has lived with patience and faith for 7 decades is not the same as a woman who never woke up. Raymond, I said, I have loved you according to the terms I believed we had agreed on. You changed the terms without telling me. That's what I'm here to address. I stood up. I was still in my royal purple robe. I picked up my tea glass. Finish reading the letter. Your attorney will need the case number before Monday. I walked past the framed picture of Jesus in the hallway, and I went upstairs, and I did not look back. Every woman in a marriage, or any partnership where she has given and told herself that was love, deserves to hear this. Your patience is not the same as your permission. Your silence is not the same as your consent. And the day you finally speak with full knowledge and zero desperation is the most powerful day of your life. The church first. I should tell you about the church. I had been a member of New Life Assembly on the South Side for 19 years. Raymond had been a deacon there for 12. I want to be honest about this. I did not go to our pastor. I did not make calls or write letters or organize a campaign. What happened in our church community was not my doing. It was the natural consequence of the truth becoming visible in a community of people who had known us both for a long time. The women of my Sunday circle had seen me walk in with my head higher. They had seen Raymond's attorney's car in the church parking lot twice when it had no business being there. They had, over the years, accumulated their own small observations, the kinds of observations that women make quietly and do not share until they understand what they are part of. And when the truth of what Raymond had done became known, as truths do in small communities, through the proper channels and the improper ones, those observations became context, and that context became the community's judgment. His pastor called him privately. This I know secondhand from one of the Sunday Circle women whose husband had been in that meeting. The conversation was not angry by her account. It was simply honest. The church has a standard for its deacons, the pastor had said. That standard had not been met. Raymond resigned from the deacon board in December. The neighbors on our street, the ones with the brick house on the corner, the family with the garden even more ambitious than mine, the older couple who walked their dogs past my front walk every morning, stopped waving at Raymond. They waved at me. They had always waved at me. But there is a quality to the absence of a wave, when it has been removed deliberately, that speaks its own language. Raymond noticed. I know he noticed, because I watched him notice and then look away from the noticing, the way he looked away from anything that couldn't be documented and reframed. His brother stopped returning calls. This one, Raymond mentioned, not to me directly, to the phone, in the living room, one evening in late December when he thought I was in the kitchen. Gerald still hasn't called me back, he said to someone, and his voice had the tone of a man accumulating small losses and refusing to name what they add up to. Patricia had achieved what she set out to achieve through the county filings. The power of attorney was formally contested, and a process was in motion to address the asset restructuring. Some things moved quickly. Some things would take longer. I will not tell you that the justice was complete and immediate and satisfying in the way that justice in stories is often described, because that would not be the truth. What I can tell you is that the income from the accounts that should never have been moved was being accounted for. The net worth of what we had built together was being examined by people whose job it was to examine it without sentiment. And Raymond, who had maintained for 25 years the calm assurance of a man whose plans were invisible, was now navigating a world in which everyone, his attorney, his pastor, his brother, his neighbors, the financial institutions, the county clerk's office, knew his name in connection with what he had done. He moved out in January. He took the Audi A8 in graphite gray, which he was entitled to. I stood in the window and watched it pull away from the curb and felt the cottage settle slightly. The way houses settle when weight is redistributed, and I breathed. The key object, the rotary phone on the wall that still works, matters differently to me now. In the beginning of this story, it was nostalgia, mine without being mine, the last unclaimed thing in a house that was being quietly taken. In the middle of this story, it was the instrument of my rescue, the conduit through which Carla Jean's voice arrived on that October Tuesday morning. And now it is something else. Now it is a choice. I could remove it. The wall would be cleaner without it. But I leave it there because it reminds me that the most old-fashioned, stubborn, seemingly irrelevant things sometimes turn out to be the ones that save you. My rebirth began the way most true rebirths begin, not with a dramatic gesture, but with a Thursday afternoon. Specifically, a Thursday afternoon in February when I sat down at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a fresh pencil and wrote the first sentence of what would eventually become my memoir. I had been thinking about writing it since Patricia told me that the documentation of the power of attorney abuse might be useful to other women in similar situations, not as legal evidence but as testimony, as the particular kind of knowledge that only comes from having lived through something and survived it and had the patience to understand it fully before attempting to explain it. The first sentence I wrote was, I signed without reading because I believed that 25 years of loving someone was the same as knowing them. I have rewritten it many times since then, but I have never changed what it means. Evelyn, my sister, who had been waiting for 3 years of postponed visits and Sunday phone calls where I told her I was coming soon, I was working on it, came to stay with me in February for 10 days. She arrived on a cold afternoon and stood in my kitchen doorway and looked at me for a moment. Really looked, the way sisters look at each other across the distance of time and worry. And then she put her arms around me and said nothing. We did crossword puzzles together every morning in my kitchen. 2 women at the same table, sweet tea between us, the rotary phone on the wall, the framed picture of Jesus in the hallway, the winter garden resting under its layer of old leaves, waiting. Evelyn lives near a place on the rural outskirts where the sky goes wide and flat in every direction, the same kind of sky we grew up under. We have been talking about me coming to be near her, a house of my own, close enough to walk to hers for morning coffee, far enough to have my garden and my mornings and my quiet. Someday I will drive an Audi A8 in graphite gray. I have decided I will have one, not because Raymond had one, but because I have earned the right to want something beautiful and to say so out loud. And I will drive it to my sister's part of the world, to the house that will be mine in the simplest and most complete sense, with no documents requiring further scrutiny, and no signature I gave in a walnut-paneled room casting shadows over what I own. I am still writing the memoir. Carla Jean is helping with the legal portions. Patricia has connected me with 2 organizations that work with older women in financial exploitation cases, and I have spoken to groups twice, once at a church in Hyde Park and once at a community center downtown, about what happened to me and what I learned from it. Both times women came up to me afterward, quietly, and told me about their own documents, their own signatures, their own moments of having believed that love was the same as protection. I told them what I will tell you now. Spring has come again. The windows are open. It is the first spring in 25 years that I have opened these windows knowing that the cottage is fully, legally, uncontestedly mine. The marigolds I planted along the fence last year are pushing up again. They came back from seed, the way marigolds will, without any help from me. And the tomatoes are started in their little peat pots on the kitchen windowsill, waiting for the last frost to pass before they go into the ground. The sweet tea is in the plastic pitcher in the refrigerator. The same pitcher I have had for years, cold and amber, and exactly right. The framed picture of Jesus is in the hallway. The rotary phone is on the wall. I do my crossword puzzles every morning at the kitchen table in my royal purple robe, and the house is quiet around me, and the quiet is a different quality of quiet than it was before. There is no undercurrent in it. There is no holding of breath. I want to be honest with you about what justice looks like from inside it, because I think stories about justice often make it sound more complete than it is. Raymond has faced consequences. He resigned from his deacon board. His brother has maintained a distance that may or may not be permanent. His standing in the community we shared for 2 decades has been altered in ways that are not reversible. The financial process is ongoing and will take time to fully resolve, but the direction is clear, and I have Patricia and her reading glasses on a chain to guide me through it. Raymond is not in prison. He is not ruined in any final and cinematic sense. He is a man living with the knowledge of what he did and the community's knowledge of what he did. And some days I think about this and feel the satisfaction of it, and other days I feel something closer to indifference, which I have come to understand is more complete than satisfaction. Indifference is not coldness. I want to explain this because it matters. Indifference, in this sense, means that his circumstance no longer determines mine. His consequences, whatever they are his. My freedom does not depend on his punishment. My peace is not contingent on his suffering. I spent 25 years in a marriage where his emotional weather controlled mine, where his needs had priority over mine, where my well-being was structured around his approval. The most radical thing I have done in the last year is not changed the locks or filed the documents or sat across from him with the papers on the table, though all of those things mattered. The most radical thing I have done is become a woman whose peace belongs to herself. I am writing this down because silence is the mechanism by which people like Raymond operate undisturbed, and I have made a decision about silence. Let me tell you what I know now that I did not know well enough before. There are manipulation tactics that operate so slowly and so systematically that they can run for years without the person inside them recognizing them as tactics. The document you sign without reading because the context is designed to make reading seem unnecessary, even insulting. The routine paperwork that is not routine. The squeeze of the hand that is meant to substitute for explanation. The steady management of your perception until your perception tells you what you are being managed to perceive. These are not the behaviors of a person who loves imperfectly. They are the behaviors of a person who understands the architecture of your trust and uses it as an instrument. Know these tactics. Learn to name them. Not because naming them will always protect you. Sometimes the manipulation is too advanced, the relationship too long established, the trust too deeply built. But naming them is where resistance begins. You are not alone in this. The World Health Organization estimates that nearly 16% of seniors in communities suffer abuse every year, and most of it is invisible. Most of it is domestic. Most of it is legal, accomplished through paperwork and routine, and the ordinary mechanisms of daily trust. Think about what that number means. Think about how many women are sitting at kitchen tables right now doing their crossword puzzles while something is being moved without their knowledge in the financial architecture of their own lives. And this, research reveals that only 1 in 24 cases of elder abuse is ever reported. 1 in 24. Because women like me believed that loyalty was its own protection. Because we had been taught that raising questions about the business arrangements of a marriage was a form of disloyalty. A failure of faith.
Because the shame of having been taken advantage of felt heavier than the weight of the advantage that had been taken. Because we had signed documents in offices with walnut desks, and we didn't want to admit that we had signed without reading. I am reporting mine now. In this memoir, in those 2 church community meetings, in this conversation with you. One piece of practical advice before I let you go, because everything I have told you should lead to something useful. Do not sign financial or legal documents without independent review. Not your partner's attorney's review. Independent review. An attorney who works for you, with no professional history with your partner, no shared interest, no obligation to anyone but you, no matter how long you have been together. No matter how much you trust the person across the table from you. No matter how many years of sacrifice you have made in service of that trust. Your signature is your most significant legal instrument. It deserves your full attention. I am 73 years old, and I am telling you this from the kitchen table where I have done my crossword puzzles for most of my adult life. The word I used to write in 7 letters, without hesitating, for blind devotion, was marriage. I don't write that anymore. I sit with the clue a little longer now. I think about what the crossing letters actually require. I make sure the word I choose actually fits the full space of the puzzle, not just the first 3 squares. I am going to Evelyn's soon. I am going to find my house near her, with the wide flat sky overhead, and the room to grow a better garden than I have managed in the city. I am going to finish my memoir, and I am going to keep speaking to women who come up to me quietly after the meetings and tell me about their own documents. I am going to have my sweet tea every morning and do my crossword puzzles at a new table in a kitchen where every key on every ring belongs to me without any asterisk. And someday, not today, but someday, I am going to drive an Audi A8 in graphite gray through the flat open country of the rural outskirts, with the windows all the way down and the spring air coming in, and I am going to think about the woman who sat in a waiting room with a plastic chair biting into her lower back and a fluorescent light buzzing overhead, remembering everything. She was already free by then. She just hadn't gotten in the car yet. Now I want to hear from you, because you have stayed with me through the whole of this, and that means something to me. Where are you listening from right now? Tell me in the comments. And I want to know, what would you have done? What would you have said in that kitchen on that Sunday morning with the papers on the table? I am asking seriously. I want to know. If Dorothy's story reached something in you, if you recognized any part of it in your own life or in someone you love, please like this video. Every like tells the platform that this story matters, that it should reach the women who need to hear it. Subscribe if you want more. I share these stories because silence has served the wrong people for far too long, and it is past time for that to change. Spring is here, the windows are open, and life, at 73 years old, has finally started to feel possible again.